Hello, my name is Mark Wade, and welcome back to Blue Marble Photography. Now, a few things have happened since the last time I had a recording session. I realized after making like 4 different videos, I did have my mic. So I apologize for the poor quality of sound. I wasn't going to re-record those. I just tried to pump up the sound as much as I could. And you can tell when I overdub with better recording, the differences between that. But other things happened as well. I talked about making a exposure up to 1 minute. I was never able to get there. I was able to make some at about 25 seconds and that kind of thing. And I was able to make some other images on a second day that that's what this video is going to be about, because the conditions were better. I was a little bit more primed after trying it and not having a very good result. I had 1 or 2 images that I liked, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's great. You know, if you can get out and make 1 or 2 really good images that you like, you've done well. But the next night, I went out in the evening and I tested out some of what I had started the day before. And I found the conditions were better. I found that I was better at it simply because it had been a long time since I tried that type of photography where I'm just kind of ignoring everything around me except the way that the environment is affecting me. I'm looking for color and light and kind of disposing of all of the previous constraints that I put on myself to make a simple static photograph. So it was really important to me to follow up with what I'm going to look at now. And you can see this computer over here on this side. That was the second round of things that I did. So I'm going to bring some of these things up, and then as I go along, I'm going to edit and show you what I'm looking at. And so I'm going to be fading in and out of this visually, but we're going to be taking a look at some of the things that I felt was important to understand when you're looking to make long exposures and when you're looking to smear the color around, you're looking to make texture on your final photograph. And I was able to achieve a few things that I feel are much, much better than that very first outing. And that's just the way things go sometimes. So let's get right into it. On this first video, I'm basically just showing the conditions of that evening. It's really, you know, the same thing as what I started off with the night before. There are some clouds that you don't see in this video. So that is the big difference between that night and the night before. So that to me was the big deal, because what happens is when the sun goes down, we actually start to get some color. And so, let me get this open really quick. And so very, very quickly, I just started with these long exposures, and here's, you know, I'll just go through those really quick. I just started practicing with longer exposures. Let me see how long those are. I have those set to 13 seconds. And so that's what that looks like when you have a 13-second open exposure. And I'm not doing anything yet, right? This is with my Nikon. The night before, I was using my little A6500 and the app that you have to download from Sony, which is kind of hokey pokey, but it's better than nothing. This is Nikon. This is what I cut my teeth on. This is what I used over and over over the years. This is my Z6, which is a step up, I think, from my DSLRs. But at the same time, it is using lenses that I'm familiar with, right? So I'm not even going to talk about this photo. We're gonna bypass that. I didn't think much about it. Then I started taking this series of photographs, and then I started again looking into these long exposures, getting things really dreamy, getting things, when you start pushing lines and tones across your frame, you're creating textures, and that's kind of what I was seeing, what was happening there. There are some clouds, again, clouds in the sky. Nothing much happens in this very beginning part of it. I'm just stretching, right? You're just looking around and stretching to see what you might possibly do. There are some pink oleanders sitting there, so I just dragged them down, and that's very simple, no big deal. It's not a final output, and you're thinking the whole time, well, can I do anything with this? Do I want to do anything with this? Well, maybe not. You know, it's a little too overpowering. Here's a single image that I really liked a lot. It really shows these flowers dancing. And that's a single frame. That's not multiple exposure. Let's see, 505. Let's see what the properties on that. When you look at the properties, that is a 1 second frame. Okay, so 1 second you could do quite a bit, right? So you don't have to go a minute. And really, when you go a minute on a long exposure, I can show you what that means. And maybe at some point I will from the next times I go out. And it's really what it is, it's an impression. And that's what these are. These are impressions. We're not talking group 64 level stuff here. This is just the opposite. These are impressions. They are suggestions of things. We're not concerned with the details. We're concerned with how the color affects the way I might feel, how the color affects my brain and my thinking. Is it calming? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for things that are calming, things that are beautiful, things that evoke a specific positive energy. That's what I'm looking for with this kind of photography. So I really like that one. Oh, there it is. It's all, yeah, I'll have to post this one. When it's all, I obviously went through, this might have been straight out of camera, I don't know. It looks like it. One of the other things I wanted to say very quickly, when you start doing these long exposures, you're going to get, you know, if you have any kind of dust or specks on your sensors, you're going to find them. Even after cleaning them, right? You're going to find that kind of stuff. That might be an issue. But you just go in and you clean it up in post. So I obviously was working a little bit here with those oleanders. And then I managed to get a bird in flight. And that is one of the hallmarks of my shots. Now, as you can see, I don't like that palm tree frond sitting on the side, but I'm starting to work into this. And that's how this one came out. And those are probably 1 second exposures until I make some 1 second exposures and then I make the bird. But in this instance, I probably made the bird first and then tried to work around it. One of the things we need to do is remember how important negative space is. If you make some negative space in your frame, then you can put a bird or a couple of birds in there. Or like what I did, I made negative space last time that I was showing these kinds of things. And then I just put a half of a sunflower in there. And it looked really cool for me. I thought it looked cool. I'm not saying you have to think it looks cool, but I liked it. I liked it a lot. So this turned out okay. I think the bird is much too small in the frame for it. And so, oh, there it is. Okay, so I did process this one. Okay, and I'll show this when I make this video because I love that. Wow, now I'm looking at it. I really like it. I like it a lot. It's got the pink flowers at those 1 second exposures or whatever that was that I did. And you see, here to me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's 1 second or 10 seconds, or if it's a minute. Whatever it takes to get to that point. And they may have been longer than a second. They may have been much longer. I don't know. But that's for you to decide and explore. Don't wait for me to tell you what to do. You have to explore this. It's up to you to do the work, to put in the time and effort that it takes to be an artist and a photographer. So I really do like that one. That to me is exceptional for a lot of different reasons. The texture alone really does speak to me. And of course, having that bird in there. Then I did catch another bird, but it was pretty awful. And I'm not even going to talk about that one. And again, here's what I'm working with. I'm looking where these birds are flying, right? And you can see in this photograph, there's some negative space in there. And if I zoom in further, maybe I won't have to worry about getting some of those trees in there. And I just want to get the bird. I'll make the dream world for it with some negative space. Then I'll make sure I get that bird in there. Now, today, Nikon and all these other cameras, the first camera that I worked with that would let you see what you're working with was my GH4, and I thought that was amazing. I didn't like what the GH4 did necessarily with colors. I feel like for colors, Nikon is just, I would say second to none for the cameras that I've used, and I've limited on my use. I've never used Canon. Now Canon, I believe, most people believe that Canon's colors are superior, but that doesn't matter. What matters is being able to get this stuff done. And then if you have to mess with the colors in post, then that's what you got to do. So remember how important negative space is. So I was working with that negative space. Again, I'm looking at this. There's a lot of negative space on the upper left part of this photograph. And what's important is that those limbs there, I know what happens when I do a long exposure with those limbs. I remember what happens with that. There was a time when that was an experiment for me, but because I've done enough experimental work with limbs and solid colors and that sort of thing, I know what to expect. I don't know exactly how it's going to end up, but I know what to expect. And that's part of experimental photography that is a joy, because you're constantly learning. You're constantly struggling to make something worthwhile. Now, I'm not saying other photography is not a struggle. I think it is. Just plain bird photography. I say plain bird photography in parentheses because it's not just plain. It's difficult work. And anybody who does that professionally or just even as an avid hobby knows, everyone knows how difficult it is to get something tack sharp and how, the lighting has to be good. And if you're doing it something that's moving, you just compounded your issues. So I'm not trying to take away anything from that type of photography. I love making those kinds of photographs. Okay, so I was working with that negative space, and I managed to get this bird. He's out of focus, but here's my point. I don't care, because again, this is an impression, and this is what they used to call pictorial type photography, where you're looking for. In this instance, it kind of emulates, an impressionist painting. Now, I'm not looking to make an impressionist painting necessarily look. I just know that I like this a lot. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, you're just going against Group 64, the philosophies. And it's like, well, I guess if that's what I end up doing, fine. But that's not in my intent. My intent is just to try and make something look halfway decent. Then remembering what twigs and palm fronds and branches will look like. I made another one, and then I did it again, and I think those are probably over 1 second long. And I left this negative space so that my silhouette of that bird will come through, and it looks like Yeah, so I went ahead and I tweaked it with some colors and stuff. Now, I don't particularly like this very much, the way it ended up, but that's not the point. Because what it's doing is it's telling me, okay, you're going in a good direction. You know, I tell myself that. You're going in, this is going to work. If you just stick with this and you just stay in that negative space, and because there's birds flying in there. If there was another spot where I was seeing this, where this could work, I'm actually developing new techniques for where I live, because I worked a spot called Mission Trails for years and years and years, starting in 2007, I think it was. I just started working it until last year when I moved away from the area. I still live close enough, but I don't live close enough to go there every day. I used to go there all the time. And I worked there till 2023, or 2022, working there all the time, making these kinds of images. And it was a great place for that because they had bird murmurations, which I'll have to show you what that kind of stuff did. Then I started to play. I started to play with other options. I was looking at the buckwheat on this part of the property. What does it look like? It kind of looks cool on a single frame, maybe. And maybe add some other things to it. Here's another bird, but again, I'm playing with it and I'm looking and I'm saying that's just too busy. Had I put him in another spot, the bird in another spot, it would have been better. And if the bird would have been, I'm always trying to get the bird with their wings out, because that to me is the most dynamic shot. You know what it is. This just looks like a blob. It just isn't very compelling at all. I think if I were to edit it and bring up all the color and everything, it would look better, but it still wouldn't look that great. The composition just isn't there. With composition, there needs to be some kind of dynamic thing happening in there, even if it's just a minimalist approach. There's some sort of tension that has to happen. And what I try to do is I try to have some sort of tension with some kind of resolution happening. For me, that dynamic motion of color and texture creates that tension. And then maybe with the bird with its arms open, to me, that's the resolution to the tension. And a lot of people will say, no, the dynamics of a bird in flight, that's your tension. But that's not how I see it. And we all can argue our own points when it comes to art. Now this one could have worked, but it didn't. The bird was landing, so I put some long exposure twig work in there, and those came out really well. I really liked the way those happened. And what is this information telling me? The next time I go up there to that piece of the property, I can work them and try to get it better. This photograph did not turn out very well, and that's okay. I didn't even bother to process it. But right after this, or very soon after this, I noticed a swallow was flying overhead, and I saw him coming, and I went ahead and grabbed my, this is all manual focus, just by the way. Because the Z6, as good as it is with autofocus for static things, I've never had good luck with trying to track birds or lock onto birds or anything like that. And so I just use manual focus, and I just keep my thumb on the wheel and I just practice. And that's something that is paramount if you're going to do this. If you don't have a really good autofocus, like what I have working with that Z6, I just tell myself, okay, if I start here, how much turn does it take to get out there? And I'm always aware of where my focus is. So if he flies that way, I try to turn the wheel just to get him as much as I can. And everything happens in split seconds. And that was a stroke of luck. You can see it's very low. It's very much underexposed because I was pointed to one part of the horizon and I started to point my camera up where it's much darker. But I was able to get an excellent silhouette of him. I'm really proud of this one. You see, I'm talking about it, but this is what I did, right? So I know I'm on 3 exposures for the frame. So I get that, and I'm, again, working with my negative spaces. And I know that I'm really proud of what I was able to do here, because I took those branches, I took those palm fronds, and I just turned it into texture. This flurry, this wave of texture, if you will. And then I made a second frame, very much the same. And I got a little bit into that bird's space, but not too bad. And the overall piece looked really good to me. This is an excellent piece. This is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that billowy look of the suggestion of twigs and palm fronds or whatever, trees or whatever, and turning them into something else that just looks like wind. It's just something singing. And I was able to get it with that really, really good bird silhouette. And for me, I was just so happy. Now, people might not like the blue background and everything. Okay, I don't know, sorry. But so I went to go process it. And when I processed it, you can see that I kind of cooled it off and I heated it up a little bit. Behind him, there's a little bit of yellow where I actually brought up the white balance. And there was still plenty of cool in the frame. You have these purple fringing that turns into what is just purple highlight. And to me, this is just, I love this photograph. I'm really, really pleased with it. And that's the way this works. You just keep working at it and you find where things are going to work with you. You don't have to go, for me, I was on one part of the property and I had to walk down to make sure that I got a clear shot of things. And that's what you're trying to do. And if you have to move, and this is what I talk about in my Basics in Depth, perspective video. Perspective is so important. You have to change it up for this kind of stuff. Be ready to not stand in one spot, and be ready to move around, and be ready to understand that some of the stuff takes a while. Like I made that shot of the bird. Well, that was luck. And I was able to make the background. Sometimes I'll make the background and I'll wait for the bird because birds aren't coming in or anything like that. And I'll make a background. Now I got to wait for the bird. And that third or fourth shot sometimes, because a lot of times I work with 4 frames on one photograph. And sometimes it'll take 10 minutes before I see something, that'll fly overhead and I'll try and get it in right where it needs to go. Sometimes that's the way it works. And you're interacting with nature. You're looking at the light. You're seeing how the light is changing. And you're making decisions based on all of these things. For me, it's a great way of making photographs and interacting with nature. This is another one, not even worth talking about. It came out so poorly. But then I started noticing the clouds. Okay, the clouds they bring another element to consider, right? How do I work in some clouds here? Well, I took a picture of the clouds. Now, this was me just pointing up to that negative space at the tree, and so the birds kind of flew down a little bit. And I thought, well, I can maybe make something with the cloud and those birds. And then I turned and I noticed that the moon was over there. So I put that in the shot, and I knew I was going to have to crop this way down to make an image. And that's what I did. No long exposures here, okay? They don't all have to be long exposures. And that's the idea, is you're just changing it up all the time. I used to change lenses a lot too. I don't do that anymore just because the sensors just get too dirty. So you're changing it up. You have to be ready to change it up. Don't get it in your head that you're doing everything right with just one thing. You're zooming in, you're pulling back, you're changing your is it going to be out of focus, in focus? Sometimes just getting things out of focus is fine. That's all you need to do. But sometimes you want movement in there. So that's all up to you and what you're going to do. I got this cloud in there. I got the moon in there with those little birds flying away. And this is how this ended up. I haven't processed this one yet. I'm going to go ahead and process it, and I'll make sure it gets into the video. I think it's really cool because anytime I see the moon, I'm going after I want to put the moon in there because the moon is think about what the moon is. We live on a planet with this moon, up in the sky. It's really, it's inspiring to people, and it makes people think outside of themselves. A lot of people live their lives going to work, coming home, eating dinner, watching TV, and going to bed, and they don't think about all of these beautiful things that are around them all the time. So when I see the moon out there, I'm absolutely all about getting it into some kind of shot. Now, this last one with the bird didn't really work out. And here is one that I added into this stack. And it was a short shutter, a very, very fast shutter. But I liked this color that was happening with the sunset behind this hedgerow of oleander. And then I did a long exposure of that same shot. And I'll have to look it up and see how long it was. I'll try to see if I can remember to put it up. But I'm telling you, when you see what you can do with some bushes, the emotion that this evokes, and people, this is texture work, okay? It's natural texture work that you make in your camera. And it's just so much fun. I like this by itself, and that's the way I used to think when I was making long exposures. I was thinking, this looks so good, this looks so good. But it wasn't until I started thinking, oh, that looks good, but maybe putting it with other photographs, stacking it in a in-camera multiple exposure work would be better. And that's what I started doing. And this is what I ended up with. It was okay, but it wasn't really great. Because one of the issues is when you're stacking your photographs, and I'm going to use this as the example. When you need to pay attention to your meter. If you shoot with it right on the center of the meter, and then you take a photograph that's metered lower, the one that's metered higher is going to overtake the rest of the photograph, okay? So if you're shooting like when I shot that bird, wherever that meter was, that should have been for the rest of the shot, and I didn't do that. So that really cool work that I did with the bushes didn't come out very well in the final analysis. And it used to be that Nikon would give you a raw file of the final output, but now they don't do that. They stack it for you and give you a JPEG. They give you raw files for the ones that coming up to it. So I think what I'll do is, let's see, did I process this one? I didn't process it, but I'll process it, and I'm going to make those bushes a lot more powerful in there. And we'll see how that looks. Maybe it'll look good, maybe it won't, so, we'll see. So here I'm just playing, right? I'm pointing my camera at those bushes. These are bushes at the bottom and the clouds up above. And to me, that's just, when I started making those and realizing just how beautiful this is, I just told myself, how are you going to continue, how are you going to just make a photograph of a bird or a wave or whatever, when you can do this, when you can make what you're looking at a wet canvas. And for me, I'm not saying that people that don't do this don't know what they're doing. I'm just saying this is me. This is just, I'm just compelled to do this. Now, I've spent the last 2-3 years trying to get better at bird photography, because it's one of the most difficult things you can try and do is good bird photography where things are tack sharp and that kind of thing. And I'm talking about birds in flight, not, you know, sitting in the front of their nest or sitting at a feeder and waiting for them. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about birds in nature, in the wild, flying and doing things. That is one of the most difficult things a photographer can try and do. Now, there is a guy, and I'm going to talk about him at some point, who does he does work with swallows. I'm going to have to talk about him because I am totally impressed with his work. So I got very lucky because I made that first photograph over by the bushes, and this little bird, I don't even know what kind of bird it is, flew up into those bushes, and he was just sitting there. So I was like, okay, so what can I do? Well, I changed my perspective because I needed some negative space, right? So I got down below where he was and was shooting up, and I was really hoping he would fly up, right, into the negative space I had already built, but he didn't. But we're going to see that that's okay because I was able to set my meter up pretty high so that it was all pretty well equal. And I caught him right as he jumped off, and I got lucky and got him just as he got off because it was a little tiny bird, and those guys are really fast, and usually they jump off and all they look like is a little torpedo. Well, he happened to have his wings open. I want to say it's luck. It's luck that you make for yourself. You get yourself in position, you get it. And then I went ahead and I got a photograph of the moon, right? Why not? Because that to me would just top this whole thing off. And I'm really thankful that, you know, along the way you can see ghost images inside your viewfinder that shows you what you're seeing. So I went ahead and I put the moon right where I wanted it. That's the beauty of today's cameras. You can put things right where you want them because you can see those ghost images. And then this was a resultant photograph. Did I edit that yet? No, I didn't edit it yet. I'm going to go ahead and edit that, and I'll put the final output in there. And well, you get something like that. For me, a bird that close, and you're able to stack two other images with it. The first image I made first, you know, so this was just luck of the draw. I sure wish he would have flown up, but that's okay. You know, you just go with what you get. Sometimes that's just the way it works, especially with wildlife. So then I started looking at clouds again. Excuse me. Started looking at clouds again. And oh, well, okay. These last videos kind of show the conditions that were going on, and it doesn't look like I had my image stabilization on. But you can see that there was color in the clouds, and that becomes really really important. And here is the sunset, you know, way beyond my my property, off in the sunset, you know, off beyond there, and all I did was meter for the clouds, right? I didn't care that I was just getting silhouette in front. I just really don't care at this point. If I wanted to make the sunset with what I was looking at there, I would have done that. Excuse me. Excuse me. It's not that interesting, so I just did that. And what I wanted to show is what you can do with something like that. You just got to make sure you don't over meter if you want to go ahead and go along exposure. Now, what I do here is I practice turning my camera thus, right? I'm looking at it, and I'm making sure that I'm leaving negative space. And that, had a bird come by, that's what I would have put in there, right in that U shape that I make. I'm building, you're composing a shot. That's composition. You're building negative space, or you're just making a quick static shot and leaving negative space, however you're going to do that. So, of course, unfortunately, by this time, it was getting late. There were no birds or bats even flying around for me to try and get. Well, that's okay. But and I look at this and I'm just like, I love it. That's just gorgeous. That's so beautiful. Those colors just are excellent. Now, I haven't edited it or anything like that. There again, I did the same thing on the second shot. And then I went ahead and I put the moon in there. And the thing about the moon, remember the moon is pretty bright. And you have to make sure that you dial it back. If you're pumping up your exposure to get some things, especially when it gets to be this late, make sure that your exposure is correct when you make a photograph of the moon. And I just went ahead and dialed it back. You can see it's just black. Everything's blacked out except for the moon. And that's what we ended up with. And to me, man, I wish there was a bird in there, but I'll tell you what, I don't care. That to me is gorgeous. That's just drop dead beautiful to me. And you know, if people don't think so, that's okay. I think it is, because I have this dynamic tension, right? This dreamscape that I've made, this dynamic tension, which is just an impression of the things that I've seen. And I put the moon in there. Now, at the time of doing this video, I haven't edited it yet, but I will edit it and I'll get it in there so we can see what it looks like with the full return of light and color and everything. Okay, so I just wanted to make this video because on my first attempt to show some multiple exposure work, I was very limited, and that was actually okay. I'm okay with that. It had been, you know, it's been a while since I have sought to get back to this way of thinking and this way of approaching a photograph. Every single one of these photographs ends up different because the conditions are so difficult, but they're not difficult. They're a joy. It's a joy to work with. And I just say it's difficult because a lot of people think it's difficult. They want to just point their camera at something and run off a couple of, they want to put a couple of settings in there and then do that and take it back home and run it through Photoshop and say that's their photograph. Now, again, I am not criticizing that. I do that quite a bit. I've been doing that for the last couple of years, trying to get into bird photography again. Because when I started photography, and I kind of fell away from it when I started doing this. And I quickly realized that bird photography is very difficult. But now this is pretty much all I ever want to do. Well, of course, unless I'm doing a wedding or family portraits or something like that. So I hope this encourages you to move forward if you want to do something like this. And just remember, it's all about practice. And I keep saying this, and I'll never stop saying this. It's about practice. Practice, practice, practice. Make mistakes so that you learn from those mistakes. And if you come home with one great photograph, like what I think I got here, and this very last one doesn't have a bird, but it is so beautifully gorgeous and everything to me. And I think other people would think so as well. And that is a more simple photograph to make once you learn these techniques. And when I say learn, once you practice them, you become disciplined. And it's that discipline that will get you to that next level. Not only next level of making things like this, but understanding your camera. And every time you pick up your camera, you'll get it faster, quicker, better. And I'm talking about, say you want to learn how to, say you want to be a second shooter for somebody at a wedding, right? You're not ready to do your own wedding, but you want to help somebody. If you know your camera as well as you should to make these kinds of images, you'll have no problems. You'll have no problems because you'll have all the knowledge of how to handle your camera, all the gear you need to have to make things work for whatever conditions come up, and what it means to push yourself. And hopefully you will have pushed yourselves into these scenarios where things become difficult. but you know that you can overcome those difficulties. And that's what a good photographer does. Thank you for listening. I hope you move forward with your photography work, and don't let anybody tell you that photography is dead because people have cameras and laptops or whatever, iPads or whatever that'll make photographs for them. It's not all the same. AI may take over the relevancy of photography in a lot of people's minds. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing something that is so artistic and requires you to work at it and become good at it. And I'll tell you, that's how you'll develop your love for it, because it helps you interact with nature. It helps you to interact with people that you're working with. And all these benefits come from the hard work that you put into it. And I say it's hard work. Don't let that scare you, because it being difficult should never discourage you. The difficulty of something is what makes it worthwhile. So go forward, be an avid photographer, and thank you for listening, and see you next time.